At 24,000 feet, the human body is dying. The air is too thin to sustain life. The cold is absolute. Now, imagine being up there. You're 4 miles above the nearest village. A storm is swallowing the mountain, and then you hear a sound that changes your life forever. That sound was Doug Scott after breaking both of his legs. The legendary climber Chris Bonington once wrote that the Himalayan climber treads a delicate tightrope between an uneventful ascent and a total disaster. On July 13th, 1977, on a jagged peak in Pakistan called the Ogre, that tightrope didn't just sway, it snapped. What happened over the next 7 days is considered the greatest survival story in the history of mountaineering. It involves 2 broken legs, a blizzard, a team slowly losing their mind to exhaustion, and a crawl. A literal crawl that lasted for miles. But this isn't a story about triumph. It's about what happens when a mountain decides to kill you, and you simply refuse to die. Today's story takes us to the Karakoram Range. The mountain is the Ogre, Baintha Brakk. It stands at 23,901 feet, or 7,285 meters. It's not the highest mountain in the world, but it's a monster. It's a complex tower of granite and ice that, in 1977, had never been climbed. The team was a British who's who of mountaineering. Chris Bonington, Doug Scott, Mo Antoine, and Clive Rowland. These men were tough. Everest was in the rearview mirror. They knew pain. But the Ogre, it was different. And before they even started their push for the summit, the mountain gave them its warning. The expedition started with high energy, but the mood shifted just a few days in. While they were staging advanced base camp, a tragedy struck the expedition right next door to them. A Laytok 2 team, their leader, Don Morrison, a friend of theirs, fell into a crevasse and died. Suddenly the game changed. This was no longer a holiday. It never really was meant to be, but things really became very serious. Death was no longer abstract. It was right there, 50 feet away in the ice. Now it was just about business. By July 13th, Bonington and Scott were pushing for the summit. And this is where the mountain started fighting back, dirty. We tend to think of climbing as this graceful, aesthetic dance, but at over 23,700 feet, it's more like a brawl. They reached the point just below the final tower. Doug Scott was leading, and he tossed 2 ropes down to his partner, Chris Bonington, so Chris could follow, and the ropes hit the rock and instantly tangled, and Bonington called it a knitting. So picture this, you're at 23,700 feet, 7,220 plus meters in altitude. The air is so thin, you're gasping for air. It's painful, every single breath. Your body is fighting for oxygen. And Doug Scott is hanging by one fist, jammed into a crack in the rock, cursing at the top of his lungs, while Chris desperately tries to untangle this mess of rope. It's not heroic at all. It's messy. It's gritty. It's Doug Scott. And then came the crux, the final wall, so they could actually stand on the summit. It was 4 p.m., late in the day. They had possibly 3 hours of daylight left. Time was not on their side. The rock was vertical, smooth granite, and Doug climbed up about 80 feet, and the crack that he was following just disappeared. There was another crack about 20 feet over to his right, but between him and that crack, there was a big blank face of granite. To get there, Doug had to do something terrifying, a pendulum, where you basically swing back and forth across the face to try to reach something far over to one side or the other. At sea level, it's one thing, but high in the altitude, in the thin air, absolutely terrifying. So Doug lowered himself down a bit and then backed up and started running across the face with the rope pulling tight like a pendulum at the face of the wall and tried to swing over to the crack. And the first time, he missed. He swung back the other way, tried again, dove out, and he missed. He did this not 3 times, not 4 times. Doug Scott did it 12 times and finally stuck it. Just imagine the physical toll of that. Sprinting across a vertical wall, gasping for air, losing strength each try after you fail. And in his hand, he had a metal skyhook. I'm going to show you this old ice axe, but essentially he was swinging out and hoping that he could reach the crack and get that hook into it and pull himself toward it like a claw, desperately trying to grab even the tiniest bit of rock. 12 times. But the mountain had just gotten started trying to put obstacles in their way. Just below the actual summit, they encountered a groove that was overhanging and covered in snow. And there were no handholds, of course. It was not going to be easy. Time was running out. The sun was setting. They were desperate, and they were not going to give up. So in a moment that perfectly captures this legendary climb, Doug Scott didn't climb the rock. He climbed Chris Bonington. Chris wedged himself into the snow, and Doug stepped carefully onto Chris's shoulder, heavy boots digging through Chris Bonington's down jacket. Doug Scott literally used his partner as a human ladder to boost himself over that final lip. We've talked about this before on this channel. Did George Mallory do it with Sandy Irvin on the second step? The Chinese did it in 1960. This was a Herculean pull, a scramble through powdery snow, and finally, they were there. 7 p.m., the summit of the Ogre. The sun dipped behind the horizon, the temperatures dropped, and the view magnificent. K2, a black triangle in the distance, Nanga Parbat glowing in the fading light. But mountaineers have a saying: to summit is optional, to get back down, mandatory. And I guess they also say the summit is only halfway. And frankly, at least for this story, that's the easy half. And they were just about to find out why. You can understand that they didn't spend too much time, any time, really celebrating on the summit. It was getting to be pitch black. It was time to move and get down the mountain to safety. So they set up a rappel anchor where you fix the rope up high and you slide down using a camming device just below the summit. Doug went first. He clipped in, he leaned back, and disappeared into the shadows below. Chris was alone on the summit, organizing gear, and he was waiting for Doug's call from below to let him know that everything was okay. And then Chris Bonington heard it. Bonington describes it as a Tarzan-like yell. It wasn't a scream of pain. It was a shout of shock. And then silence. Chris froze and he stared into the darkness. Doug! Nothing. He grabbed the rope. It was tight below him. Doug hadn't fallen off the end. He was obviously hanging there. And Chris yelled again, "Are you okay?" There was a long pause, and then a voice floated up from the dark. It was calm, but terrifying. "I've broken my legs." This was not, "I hurt my ankle," but Doug Scott had broken both legs. His tibia and fibula snapped on the right, and his left ankle was shattered. Doug had slipped on a patch of ice while swinging across the face. He slammed into the rock wall, shattering his lower legs instantly. This is almost more than I can even bear to imagine. And can you imagine the feeling that Doug Scott had and Chris Bonington, realizing how far away they were from safety? He was now dangling essentially in the death zone, and he was unable to stand. He was unable to walk, with miles of vertical terrain between him and safety. So Chris rappelled down to him, and Doug was sitting on a small ledge holding his legs. Now, in a movie that has a good ending, you can imagine somehow, some way they get out of there. But this was no movie. This was real life. Doug Scott and Chris Bonington right near the summit of the Ogre, having to get themselves down the mountain, Scott with 2 broken legs. If Doug Scott was going to get down this mountain, he was going to have to do it on his own, on his own hands and knees. So it was pitch black and they couldn't descend any further that night. So they found a tiny snow cave and they buried themselves in there to huddle out of the elements. They had no food, they had no stove to melt water for hydration. And here's the reality of survival. It's not glorious, it's not pretty. They spent that entire night freezing, facing one another, with their frozen feet basically shoved into each other's midriff to keep their feet from freezing, massaging each other's toes to keep the frostbite away. 2 men shivering in the dark, knowing that morning was not going to bring relief, but really just be the beginning of their nightmare descent. And of course, the next morning they wake up and, wouldn't you know it, the Ogre sent them a storm, a blizzard, completely engulfed the mountain. So Doug Scott, with 2 broken legs, began to crawl. He couldn't walk, and when his knees rubbed raw, he sat on his backside and scooted forward, whatever it took to get himself closer to safety. He had to descend thousands of feet of technical rock this way. But here's where this story gets even more terrifying. It wasn't just Doug Scott's legs that were broken. The whole team's mind was breaking. Exhaustion is like a poison. It makes you do stupid things and think crazy thoughts. So a few days into the descent, Mo Antoine, one of the other climbers who was not with them on that summit, rigged a rappel, but he made a mistake. He used 2 ropes of different lengths and tied a knot on the end of one, but left the other dangling just short. And so Doug rappelled down and didn't check the ropes in advance, and wouldn't you know it, he fell off the end of the short rope. And by some absolute miracle, he managed to grab the other rope to stop his fall. Had he not been able to do that, he certainly would have plummeted to his death. But wait, it gets worse. Moments later, Chris Bonington comes down. He's the leader of this team, and he's one of the most experienced climbers, not only on the team, but in the entire world. He's so tired, so hypoxic that he makes the exact same mistake that Doug Scott had made a few moments earlier. He falls off the end of the short rope and falls 20 feet through the air, slamming into a rock ledge. And in the process, he breaks 2 ribs. He feels like he's fine, just bruised, but later on, he realizes he's also contracted pneumonia and likely had pulmonary edema, meaning he had fluid building up in his lungs. Time was of the essence, and there was no time for them to feel bad about their pain or their predicament. They had to keep moving, and quickly. So now you have a team of 4. Clive Rowland was with them as well, helping rig the rappels and further rope sections that they needed to get down that were too technical to climb. One has 2 broken legs, another has 2 broken ribs, and is starting to cough up a bloody froth. And they're hungry and thirsty. They haven't eaten in days. Their bodies are completely dehydrated. And so finally, on the 7th day, they get down the mountain. 7 days of crawling, 7 days of the team helping Doug lower down over and across crevasses on 10-foot sections of rope, because that's all they had left. And then finally, they stumbled onto the glacier, level ground, and they could see it. There was base camp in the distance. It was like they had made it. What a relief that must have felt like to them. Salvations, tea, food, a doctor to attend to them, maybe some pain drugs for them. And so Mo Antoine, he ran ahead to greet the support team and to notify them that they are going to need some help. But when he got there, the camp, it was completely empty. No tents, no porters, no food, nothing. Just a pile of rocks and a note. And the note was from Nick Escort, a team member who had stayed behind and lost complete hope. And that note began with the chilling words, "In the unlikely event that you are reading this." Nick had certainly no thought that they were going to survive. The team had been gone for so long, 7 days overdue. There's no way people could survive that long up on the mountain. So they essentially pulled up stakes and left. The support crew assumed that the 4 of them were dead, and they had packed up and left that very morning. Imagine that feeling. You fight for everything for 7 days, and there's nothing there to greet you. So your ordeal continues, kind of like ghosts walking back into the land of the living, but there's nobody alive anywhere near. Mo Antoine, he didn't stop. He ate a handful of raw sugar cubes that he found in the dirt, and he kept running. He ran down the glacier for another 2 days to catch up to the team that had left early that morning. So Mo caught up to them as they were literally discussing how they were going to notify the climbers' wives that 4 of them had died on the Ogre, to tell them that they were now widows. And Doug Scott, he literally crawled all the way to safety. He survived. Chris Bonington survived. Clive Rowland and Mo Antoine, all of them survived. And that's why the Ogre is legendary. And certainly not because they conquered it, not in the least. That word is never a part of their vocabulary. They survived it. If you found this story intense, you really need to check out my video on Natalia Nagovitsyna on Pobeda Peak, done just recently, about her breaking her leg near the summit and staying up above 7,000 meters to wait for a rescue. That story does not have a good ending. I'll put the link to that in the description below. It's definitely worth a watch. Doug Scott broke his legs and made it home, and, well, let's say that Pobeda Peak didn't let Natalia leave. And so if you have found this story interesting and you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, would you please take a moment and click that subscribe button? It would mean very much to me. And also consider becoming a member of Everest Mystery. There is tons of exclusive content, hours and hours upon it. Give it a try, take a look, and think about supporting Everest Mystery. And also check out our merch page, everestmystery.com, where there's plenty of really cool glassware. There's hoodies and also hats for everyone to sport their favorite YouTube channel. And in the meantime, most importantly, do somebody a good deed. Don't ask for anything in return. Make the world a better place, one tiny step at a time. Peace be with you.